The East Baton Rouge Parish Library believes that a thriving business community is good for us all. That's why we help entrepreneurs start businesses with tools like Gale Business Builder. Keep commerce rolling by providing access to computers, printers, and free Wi-Fi at 14 branch locations. Get a library card. Grow your business at ebrpl.com/business.
Good morning and welcome to Strictly Business. I'm your host, Penny Font. This webcast features conversations with Louisiana's most influential CEOs, entrepreneurs, and community leaders with the goal of providing insights, ideas, and inspiration to help you and your business grow. We want to keep Strictly Business as interactive as possible. So for those joining us live, here's an icebreaker question for you. Submit your vote in the comments and the results will be posted at the end of the webcast. Strictly Business is brought to you by the East Baton Rouge Parish Library. Without their support, this project would not be possible. Elite teams drive exceptional performance, innovation, and competitive advantage. So how do we go about building one? That's what we're going to explore this month with career competitor, founder, and owner Steve Mellor. Mellor is an ICF PCC certified executive coach who has worked and coached in high-performance industries for 2 decades. As such, the former top 50 world-ranked competitive swimmer for Great Britain and Olympic swim coach has worked with elite athletes, business owners, executives, and emerging leaders. Through Career Competitor, he oversees coaching and workshop facilitation that ensures clients invest in their optimal selves when pursuing optimal performance. His mission is to educate, equip, and empower audiences to make lasting investments in their personal growth, performance mindset, and culture development. He's also the author of Shock the World and the host of Career Competitor podcast. Steve, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us.
Penny, I am just beyond grateful to have this opportunity. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
We are too. So let's start with defining the term that's the focus of this session, because we know interpretation certainly can vary. How do you define an elite team in a business context?
Yeah, whenever we get onto words, as clients of mine will know, words, they matter so much that we all understand the true definition, or how at least we're all perceiving the definition to be. And that is arguably sometimes more important than the actual definition itself. But in this case, I like to immediately categorize it as, are we being elite in regards to the world we operate in, i.e. within our business, or are we looking to be elite within an industry? Are we looking outside of ourselves? And that immediately creates 2 totally different scenarios for anyone who is considering creating or already started the process of forming this elite team. Because if we focus just on the internal definition for elite, then we have a lot of flexibility around that. We can kind of create that as we go, and it's a lot more proactive in many ways. Whereas when we're thinking about industry elite, there's a little bit more of a reactive approach to how we create these elite teams. We have to be able to respond at any point to, oh, wait, industry standards are changing. Things are moving in a way that we weren't necessarily expecting. How can we now adapt, and probably adapt quickly as an elite team? But at the heart of both of those definitions is clear standards. How are we establishing those clear standards so that everybody that is involved, whether it's a team of 2 or a team of 22, it doesn't matter. It's all about what are the standards, and do we all understand what those standards are?
That's such a great insight. What key principles from coaching elite athletes have you applied to coaching business leaders?
It's funny because that question immediately makes me just go back to when I started the business. And, I come out of sport. I've worked at the top of the sport of swimming pretty much my entire life up to that point. And now I'm sitting down with somebody that firstly is clothed, they're not a swimmer anymore. So that was a very, very quick difference in terms of the people that I was working with. But one thing that made the transition for me so easy was the moment that I saw business professionals and business leaders for what they were, and that's high performers. It's the one thing that business leaders and athletes have in common. Whether they like it or not, they're competitive, they're motivated, they're driven, they're ambitious, all these things. And there's a lot of similarities in those world in terms of what's going on between the ears. And in the world of sport, the further and further you go with it, the more you start to realize is that the people around you, you share a lot of the same talents. You share a lot of the same principles in terms of how you train and how you get better. And what it comes down to a lot of the time is this thing between the ears, your ability to feel ready, to be ready, and to be able to perform when the spotlight is on you, when you're on that Saturday night in Death Valley or whatever it's going to be. And then in the business world, there's so many versions of those high stake moments that we deal with in sport, whether it be a presentation, whether it be a board meeting, whether it be that huge meeting that you have coming up with a client. There's still all the preparation you can do, just like those that are either within your team or other companies that do the same thing that you do. But then you need to show up and perform. You still need to go in there and execute when there is a little bit of pressure, when there may be some added stresses, and it may feel as though there's a difference in those two worlds between athletes and business leaders. But when you look at it that way, you quickly realize there's a lot more similarity than we might be willing to accept.
Yeah, a lot of parallels. What are the most critical attributes you look for when working to assemble an elite team?
Well, you've done some work with me, and you know I like acronyms, and so for me, acronyms can be really powerful for this kind of thing. And so when I think about assembling that team and making sure you've got the right people around, you want them to be able to act. You want them to be able to act as you need an elite team to be. I'm going to break that word "act" down into 3 separate words. I'm going to start with the letter A, and we're going to talk about alignment. So finding alignment in its most simple form is knowing who's on the team and what does everybody want to achieve. That is one of the simplest things we can do as business leaders when we bring that team together. Do we know our people, and do we know what they want to achieve? And are we having conversations about that? Because if we are, then we should all be singing from the same hymn sheet when we get started. Which brings me to the C, which is communication. Are we communicating? Do we speak the same language? Is one of us speaking to our direct reports in a way that is completely different to the way in which another member of the team is doing it? Is that creating problems? Could that be hurting the team overall? These are the kind of questions that we need to be asking ourselves and be aware of, which moves us to the T, which is that of tenacity. So alignment and communication are much more in the moment, process-oriented components. But the T, that tenacity, you need to know that your team, that when there is that wall, when there is that resistance, when that adversity comes along, do they want to meet the challenge? Do they want to face it head on? Because even with all that alignment and that great communication, if they're not excited when a challenge comes their way, it's always going to be that little bit more difficult for a team to truly be elite. So that's my acronym. Maybe I'll keep it to 1 acronym while we're here. I'm not sure, but that for me is a really easy, simple way for anyone listening to this to say, okay, I think I can look at my team right now and answer those 3 questions straight away.
Absolutely. How can a company assess its current team performance and identify areas for improvement?
Yeah, there's speaking of alignment, there's this approach that I like to take at the heart of a meeting, which is very simple. It's as simple as sort of 1, 2, 3, because we want to be able to shift a team in a way where they can start to feel, okay, we are improving. There's a performance, there's a standard, there's an identity, if you will, that we are creating. And so for the company itself, we need to stop and just ask in a series of 1, 2, 3 questions, what are the goals and what are the areas for growth that we're trying to commit to right now? So let's start with that question first of all. Then secondly, what makes you confident that these commitments are going to be achieved? And then finally, what concerns do you have around whether the team has the ability to make those commitments happen? And so I did say I might resist from acronyms, which I have, but I've got my 3 C's here now, which is that of creating that initial commitment. Are we all singing the same hymn sheet again? Are we all seeing these commitments the same? What's our level of confidence towards all of those commitments? And then finally, if there is any concern, let's air that concern out. Let's have a conversation around that. Let's be clear before we fire away and start getting to work, because most teams want to just get to work because they think, hey, if we're working, we must be getting better, right? It's like, well, just hold on a second. Why don't we just check in before we do that? Align ourselves with our commitments, get clear on how confident we are around it. And then finally, if we do have any concerns, let's voice them now. Let's not wait for those concerns to become a reality.
Very straightforward. What are the first steps a company should take when working to build an elite team?
Yeah, the great Simon Sinek he brings it always back to start with why. Start with why. And in regards to an elite team, why are you bringing these people together? Why are we creating a team? And in the sports world, that's pretty straightforward, right? If you're putting some people together to have a football team, the reason why is to have a football team. And if you're looking at your organization and saying, hey, if we're going to have many teams, if we're going to have a couple of teams, however many teams you have in many ways is irrelevant within your organization. But the question is, if you're putting a group of people together, do you know why? Do you know why you're putting them together? Because they need to know why to pursue what it means to be elite. If there's no true why behind that team coming together, then eventually you're going to see that it's just a group of individuals and people are moving in different directions or toward and creating resistance with each other. We want to be able to epitomize what it means to be elite. And the best way to do that is from the very outset, sit down with anybody that you bring together in a team and say, hey, this is why we've brought you together. And now let's have a conversation about those standards of what it means to aspire to be elite.
So often we don't stop to ask these questions. So these are good, good to know. What role does company culture play in building and maintaining an elite team?
Yeah, culture happens to be arguably my favorite topic to sit down and talk about alongside elite teams and becoming your optimal self. The one thing with culture that we sometimes forget is that we don't want to create elite teams within our company that when we actually step away from the team, the culture hurts those individuals once they're away from the team. And what I mean by that is we want to surround a team with the kind of culture that team epitomizes and that the culture epitomizes. There shouldn't be too many differences between the holistic organizational culture and that of the teams within it. So whenever you are, again, going back to that previous question, when you talk about why, you need to be bringing some of those cultural ideals into the team from the get-go so that you're able to honor the culture within the team. But the beauty of an elite team, Penny, is that over time, that elite team can take its own identity and it can start to feed positively into the culture around it. It should not be taking from that culture. It should certainly not be hurting that culture. But that's when elite teams start to get really fun, especially when you think about an executive team. When that executive team is humming and firing on all cylinders, the trickle-down effect around the organization is felt on a cultural level. And that's the power of this work. So it's about considering the culture, looking in towards the team, but then the team must always consider, hey, as we operate, are we considering the culture as well and working with the culture as opposed to against the culture?
Love it. Can you discuss the importance of continuous personal growth for leaders in maintaining elite teams, and also talk to us about the role of mentorship and coaching within elite teams?
Yeah, how much time do we have? Personal growth is my be all end all. It's everything that I believe in terms of how I show up first and foremost. But then any team that I'm working with currently, any one-on-one client, everything is about, hey, how are we pursuing our optimal self? And I want to almost provide a perfect example from the sport world here with this, is that in the world of sport, for any sports fans out there, what you will have noticed is that in the last 10 to 15 years, we've never seen as great an improvement in human performance in the sports world as we have in the last 10 to 15 years. And that's had nothing to do with, well, not nothing to do, but it's certainly not because primarily the cause of improved equipment or improved training methods or all these other sort of secret sources that you might see online. That's not the main reason why it's happened. The main reason is how athletes have started to invest in things like rest, how they've started to invest in health, how they've started to prioritize their mental health, their spiritual health, their emotional health. All of these things that allow them to recover effectively has allowed them to show up and perform at levels that we've never seen before in the sports world. And it's the exact same message to anybody listening to this that is that business leader, that is that CEO that feels as though they can't say no to this, they can't say no to that they can't change their 14, 15 hour a day schedule and bring it down to 10 or 11 hours. At some point, you have to learn how to say no to certain things. You have to look at your routine and say, am I able to bring my best self to this routine day in, day out? Or is this routine taking that ability for me to do so away from me. And the sooner we have those conversations as business leaders, the sooner we start to actually move towards the better version of ourselves. And it's why so much of my talk and language is not around the personal versus the professional. It's around performance. When we start to look at ourselves as someone who's trying to perform in our best, we don't look at it as the person or the husband or the spouse, the child, the whatever it is, and we don't look at it as the title that we have or the business that we hold. We look at it as the human being that's staring us in the mirror. And the more we start to aspire to perform at our best as humans, the more likely we're going to show up on a personal and a professional level at our absolute best as well.
I want to take that a little bit further. How do you recommend leaders cultivate a performance mindset within their teams?
Yeah, it's about, for me, it's about trying to get out of the rat race mindset of hitting a milestone and hitting a goal, because there's something quite linear about that. And I try to sort of shift people's minds towards, what if we looked at it as cyclical instead? What if we looked at it as seasonal, if you will? Again, you're going to hear a lot of sports analogies from me. If you're not a sports fan, I'm hoping that you're keeping up with us here. But again, the thing with sports is that it's a season. You know, you have the off season, you have the part of the year where you're trying to perform at your best. Maybe you go to playoffs and you go to compete in the finals, and you're always trying to level up and get better and get better. And then once the season comes to an end, you go back through that process again. It's not linear. And the more we look at ourselves in this space as an elite team, as a high performer, as a culture, however you want to look at it within our organizations, if we say, hey, listen, we're going to go through a sprint right now. We've got a couple of weeks here where we've got some serious deadlines. We've got to really show up and perform. But listen, guys, when we get to the end of those 2 weeks, we're going to hit some measurables. We're going to look at how we performed, and then we're going to bring back round into that cycle. We've got to recover. We've got to replenish. We've got to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, because at any point, another 2-week stretch like that can come up. The problem is, Penny, when those 2 weeks turn into 2 months and 2 years, and we think that we can keep it going. And what's really been happening behind the scenes is that everything has been very slowly regressing, but we're sort of counteracting that by doubling down on that process, when really we need to find that cycle, that seasonal approach, if you will, and that's actually going to provide us high performance.
Such great insight. What are some common challenges you've observed in businesses trying to build elite teams, and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, the great John Gordon talked about it in his first book, The Energy Bus, these energy vampires, you know, and I think anybody that's been in business long enough, or just in life, if you played sports growing up, whatever it may be, you've had a hobby or whatever it is, you've probably been on a team at some point where immediately I say something like energy vampire, and you can probably think of someone right away. And that's just the way it is on teams sometimes. There's nothing we can do about that. The question is, though, as leaders, that is a challenge to your team, firstly, that your team is going to have to figure out when you have that individual that's maybe toxic, that's maybe pulling from the group as opposed to providing to the group. But then you have a question as the business leader to ask when you're overseeing that team. Is this individual worth the work in terms of getting it figured out, bringing them into the team, and how much of that work am I willing to do until it's time for me to have a difficult conversation, until it's time for me to look at this and say, whether this person's talented, whether this person's been highly recommended, whatever it may be, maybe it's a reputation from long ago that for whatever reason they've now outgrown. This stuff happens in the workplace daily, and we have a question as leaders and as teams, if we want to be elite, is this individual worth carrying the way that we've been carrying, or do we need to stop, work on this individual, figure out a way to bring them up to speed, or have those difficult conversations? Because at no point do we want to allow ourselves to hurt that elite status of the team that we're trying to develop.
Absolutely. So what are some immediate steps or tools that leaders can use to create traction towards building an elite team?
Start talking. Start having conversations. Straight away, whenever someone asks me a question like this, Penny, I believe that there are values that we typically have in place in our organizations, whether it be in the form of a mission statement, and people get pretty creative these days in terms of how they do that, pillars that people put on the walls, etc. But at a certain point, there are these values, and as leaders, we have a question to ask sometimes within our elite teams. Hey, guys, I know what our organizational values are, what are your values? What are your 3 to 5 things that make you who you are? That if I brought a stranger into this team right now, the 3 or 5 things that they would abundantly be able to see in abundance from you is A, B, C, D, E. Those would be the values that come across. And it's good for a team sometimes just to take, say, organizational influence, maybe use 1 or 2 of those values, but then find maybe 2 or 3 creative values that they can also build that are their own, that allows them then to feel as though they are forming an identity. They are forming a personality as a group, because here's the result of that: ownership. They're now going to take ownership of that group. You want your teams to operate without you. Leaders, it's time to get over yourself when it comes to that. I know it feels ego-wise. You want to feel as though, oh, they need me at all times. But for you to be the best version of yourself as a leader, your teams need to be able to operate in your absence. That is so crucial. And if you can build that true ownership of the team and of that elite standard by simply having discussions around value systems, then we can really start to build that identity that they take pride in and that they hold on to and represent for hopefully years and years to come.
What are some other signs that a team is moving toward elite status?
Yeah, I just mentioned there pride. I heard myself say that word pride, and I think it's something that when we think about things through this professional lens sometimes, the place that we work, people say, oh, it's a paycheck, but you want it to be more than that, right? We're never going to have an elite team that's in it for the paycheck. There has to be something beyond the paycheck, and we want them to start to create a pride, a sense of pride in not only the work that they do, but what it is that they are representing. It's something that's bigger than them. That was the one thing in all my time in sport, was that the greatest individual success stories came out of the groups, the teams that had the greatest sense of pride for the work that they did and what it was that they represented. And it's no different in the business world. And just to add to that too, I think what that also does is it introduces collaboration. When we create that pride on the front end, we're creating other emotions such as trust and respect for one another within that team. And we're going to want to collaborate as opposed to isolate ourselves within the group because of that pride for who we are, how we show up, and the performances that we create in our work too. So those are some of the things that immediately come to mind that I think anyone listen to this, it's like, hey, when I look at my team, do I get a sense of pride in their performance? Do I see collaboration and the initiative behind that collaboration as well? And if you're able to see some of those things, you're well on your way to having that elite team.
So important. We've touched on some of this in the conversation, but I want to see if drill down a little bit more. What are some strategies for maintaining high performance and motivation within elite teams, and how do you handle underperformance?
Yeah, I have this process that I do with a lot of folks, which is my strategic alignment. And again, that word alignment, you're going to hear me talk about that a lot whenever I mention teams, but it's the practicing of growth mindset within that strategic alignment workshop or meeting, however you want to label it. Because the 3 areas that I always integrate with any sort of strategic alignment is that of curiosity, challenging, and then commitments. And the beautiful thing about that is it honors everything that I've already talked about. Most importantly, it's a cycle. It's a cycle in itself. So when we truly epitomize growth mindset within our environments as a strategy, as a culture, as an identity, then we suddenly become so much more curious as individuals and as teams. We want to learn. We want to find out what we don't know. It's one of my favorite things to say to people when I first meet with them is we're going to discuss what we know, what you don't know, and we're also going to cover a whole bag of what you don't know, and that's the beauty of curiosity is we're going to reveal that kind of thing, but we're going to create an environment where we can challenge each other respectfully with a forward-thinking mindset and saying, hey, I don't want to just challenge you for the sake of the fact that I disagree with you. I actually want to challenge you in a way where I want you to challenge yourself in the challenge that I'm providing. I want you to ask harder questions because maybe I'm seeing that you're capable of more, and I want to challenge you on that because I've got your best interests in mind, which leads us to those commitments. We always want to walk out of any strategic alignment session, any time that we spend together as a team, having set some commitments that when we come back, the next time we meet, whether it's a week, a month from now, we're going to come back so curious because of what those commitments have told us. Have we followed through with those commitments? Have we not followed through with those commitments? We've got more things to discuss, which means we can be curious all over again. And that right there, Penny, is the most simplest way I can sort of explain growth mindset and the way we can incorporate that as a strategy within our organizations.
Can you share a success story of a business that transformed its team to achieve elite status? Just an example.
Yeah, I think I want to, with respect to this program, I want to make it something here in the capital region. And for me, one of my most recent success stories in terms of the work that I'm doing is that of the business Sigma here in town, engineering and construction. I've been working with them now for most of the past year. And that's an organization that's been accustomed to success, that's been accustomed to being and trying to see themselves as elite. And the beauty of that work is, as I work with their executive team month in, month out, quarter to quarter, what we've been able to do there is get used to having conversations around what it means to be more elite, to challenge the status quo of, hey, the norm right now is us being excellent, and yet we're still curious enough to find out what else we don't know. We're still curious about what it's going to take to move from this size an organization to this size an organization. And that's come from just consistent one-on-one coaching, group coaching sessions, and an executive team that's willing to say, listen, this isn't about me. It's about us. And as an executive team, when we're elite, the rest of this organization is immediately better positioned to be elite as well. So that's without a doubt one of my favorite success stories, and the work that they've done, none of it's been easy, but it's been so rewarding. And that's the best part about all this, Penny, is the reward is always there on the back end.
That's so impressive. Thank you for sharing that with us. This has been a great conversation. What final piece of advice might you offer to CEOs and C-suite executives?
Yeah, I don't know whether, I might as well keep with the sports analogies, but I don't know if we have any Ted Lasso fans listening. But if we don't, you need to start watching the show. If we do, then you appreciate this. Be curious. Be curious at all times. Rarely is the initial problem that has come to your attention the actual problem. That's typically the surface problem. There's usually something beneath the surface that, if you're willing to ask the right questions, if you're willing to spend the time around it, you can help your team become elite because you're willing to take that time to truly figure out what the problem may be. There's potentially always other options to where you want to be. And then there's always something about yourself that you probably don't know that can help you in all sorts of moments as a leader. So in the words of Ted Lasso, be curious, because if you remain curious as a leader, rarely is there ever going to be moments where you're surprised, because you're always ready to learn. And that, in my opinion, is one of the best things we can always be doing as leaders.
Awesome. Steve, thank you so much for making the time to join us today.
I appreciate the time, Penny. It's been such a pleasure for me to speak about this with you.
And thanks also to our viewers for joining us, as well as our sponsor, the East Baton Rouge Parish Library. Please join us again for the August 21st episode of Strictly Business. Until then, enjoy and make your day a great one.